From the Caribbean islands to the east coast of the United States, a deadly drug gang makes millions. But its leader remains a mystery. As their cocaine trafficking business thrives, the violence rages out of control. To destroy the gang, agents and police know they must identify the leader and take him down.
The United States is one of the most profitable drug markets in the world. For ruthless and sophisticated drug traffickers, it is truly the land of opportunity. I'm Jim Kallstrom, former head of the FBI's New York office. In the 1990s, a violent drug organization moved thousands of kilos of Colombian cocaine through the Virgin Islands and into Georgia. It would take a task force of dedicated agents and police to shut down this multi-million-dollar operation and destroy a cocaine empire.
The U.S. Virgin Islands are a tourist's paradise. Lush tropical islands and miles of sandy beaches, all in America's backyard. But these islands hold a dark secret. Law enforcement refers to them as the cocaine funnel. Because they are located halfway between South America and the U.S. mainland, drug gangs use the islands to ship large amounts of cocaine into the U.S. Starting in the early 90s, a drug gang called the Island Boys shipped thousands of kilos of cocaine into the U.S. through the Virgin Islands. They chose the unlikely city of Augusta, Georgia as their main point of entry. There they turned the cocaine into crack. FBI Special Agent Tim Cox.
It was primarily the population that drew them in. At the time, there were several projects that were ripe for selling crack cocaine. It's also a 2-hour city. You're 2 hours away from Atlanta. You're 2 hours away from Savannah.
But the competition between the Island Boys and local drug gangs is brutal. Eugene Smalls runs the Augusta operation for the Island Boys. Business is good. In 1991, the gang is raking in millions. And Smalls makes a big target. There are rumors he keeps $1 million in cash in his safety deposit box. He wears the key around his neck. By the time Augusta police arrive, Eugene Small's safety deposit box is empty, and the powerful drug dealer is fighting for his life. He survives, but his injuries are severe. The rising violence in Augusta concerns police, and the Island Boys are at the center of it. The Augusta police discuss the problem with the FBI. They start by explaining what they know about the gang.
The local authorities, through their contacts with informants and some of the arrests that they'd made previously, knew that there was an increasing number of these gentlemen coming up from the Virgin Islands. The informants had given indication that they were moving more and more cocaine into the area.
In October 1992, the FBI and U.S. Customs worked to build a federal conspiracy case against the Island Boys. Cox suspects the Island Boys are working with a major Colombian cocaine cartel. One thing is clear, they are as mysterious as they are deadly.
We didn't have any inroads into the group, So we were having to put together as much intel as we could by bits and pieces.
Agents assemble photos of suspected gang members taken by the local drug squad. Former U.S. Customs agent Larry Sapp.
So we didn't even know who they were. We'd put them in there to see if somebody would later identify them.
They also scour every report they can find that has any connection to the Island Boys. One report stands out. A month earlier, 2 DEA agents spotted Eugene Smalls at the airport in Atlanta. Despite his injuries, the local drug boss personally picked up a passenger on a flight from the Virgin Islands. The DEA decided to follow Smalls. Agents radioed the Georgia Highway Patrol and asked them to pull the car over for speeding.
DEA had had enough of following them and joined the locals there and got them all out of the car, searched them, took all their money, tried to interview them all. I can't walk.
Smalls could barely walk. His passenger, James Springett, was carrying a passport from the U.S. Virgin Islands. Agents also searched the car. They found nothing. No drugs, no weapons, and surprisingly little cash. The DEA photographed the 2 men as well as their credit cards and IDs and had to let them go. Agents can use the credit card information to track the movements of all 4 suspects. But there's also a downside.
Then they know that they've been watched or being watched and may affect their behavior in the future. They may be more careful of surveillances and more careful of movements and things of this nature.
Agents wonder about James Springett. Who is he and what role does he play? Eugene Smalls picked him up at the airport personally, even though Smalls was still recovering from bullet wounds. Obviously, James Springett is important. Special Agent Cox contacts the local police to see if they have any information.
Yes, Officer Cox. Got anything on?
The Richmond County Sheriff's Department Narcotics Squad have been fighting the gang since it first arrived in Augusta. But they have never heard of James Springett. If law enforcement hopes to take down the Island Boys, they're going to have to do it the hard way, from the bottom up.
We started on the street level, doing surveillances when we could, getting information from the local authorities, and trying to develop some other inroads into the group.
Again, they hit a brick wall. The Island Boys have a dangerous reputation. Even paid informants are afraid to talk about the group.
It was hard to develop informants because this group was known to be violent, and informants were afraid to do anything with them because they had a reputation for hurting and killing people.
Federal authorities conduct surveillance. They observe that members of the gang frequently use motel rooms to do business. After they check out, teams of agents search their rooms.
You'd be surprised that you find phone numbers, photos, different things. This whole case was like somebody that had filled a room with puzzle pieces and we're trying to dig our way out and figure out who is who.
The pressure is constant and intense. Too intense for Eugene Smalls, the head of the Augusta Island Boys.
We were putting a lot of heat on him.
Eugene Smalls decides to relocate to Virginia.
I personally think that the reason Eugene left was things were getting too hot for them around Augusta.
In Smalls' absence, a man named Shaquem Gabriel becomes the new leader of the Island Boys operation in Augusta, Georgia. Agent Sapp alerts Virginia authorities. Eugene Smalls is heading their way.
They were on him as soon as he got up there and worked him and ran a good case up there.
Smalls is arrested in Virginia Beach for drug trafficking and eventually convicted and sentenced to 90 years in prison. In Augusta, agents focus on Shaquem Gabriel, the new leader of the Island Boys. They suspect the gang is bringing drugs in through the Atlanta airport.
when you look at the amount of money that they were running, plus the amount of cocaine that we knew they were putting on the street, it was obvious they were having to run lots of loads of luggage through and use lots of couriers.
On June 14, 1995, agents in Atlanta find a suitcase containing 7 kilos, more than 15 pounds of cocaine.
James, we can change this around. Who you delivering the coke to?
Investigators question the courier.
James.
He tells agents the drugs were going to Shaquem Gabriel in Augusta.
Shaquem Gabriel.
We had enough corroborating information, through phone tolls and that to substantiate exactly what the courier was saying.
Based on the courier's statement, authorities are able to obtain an arrest warrant and a warrant to search Gabriel's home. On June 15, 1995, authorities serve both warrants. As the agents close in, they have no idea what Gabriel has waiting for them behind his door. In Augusta, Georgia, the FBI, along with U.S. Customs and local police, work to take down a violent drug gang. Investigators arrest Shaquem Gabriel, the man they believe is the new head of the Island Boys in Augusta. Gabriel is accused of attempting to receive 7 kilos of cocaine from a courier from the Virgin Islands. A search of his home turns up documents, photos, and $15,000 in ones. Special Agent Tim Cox.
Apparently, Shaquem felt it was beneath him to spend dollar bills, so he wouldn't spend dollar bills, he would stuff them in these jars.
For law enforcement, Gabriel's arrest is a big success,
Take him away.
but it doesn't stop the Island Boys. As soon as authorities take Gabriel into custody, agents suspect that new leaders are already emerging to take over the gang.
Whenever we would take people off from the group, make an arrest or anything else, other people from the islands would arrive back in the States and take their place in the group, distributing around Augusta area.
Investigators continue to go after the Island Boys using the same techniques they used to take down Gabriel. But it's not working. It seems the Island Boys have changed tactics. They must be using another means of getting their drugs past customs at the airport. Agents have to find it. Customs expands its searches both in the Virgin Islands and in U.S. airports. On February 6, 1996, agents get a break when a random customs check finds cocaine in a suitcase arriving in Atlanta. The bag belongs to a teenage girl from a housing project in Augusta. The gang has been eluding police by using couriers that don't fit the usual profile. Former U.S. Customs agent Larry Sapp.
They would find young girls that had no money, no future, and ask them would they like to go to the Virgin Islands for a week, free vacation. And of course, anyone would say yes, and the only stipulation was you had to bring back a package for them.
These were easily influenced young people that just saw an opportunity to make some money. Granted, it was illegal, but in a sense, they were victims of this group as well. They couldn't bring a lot to the table for us, but what they could tell us is who offered the deal, what the deal was.
The courier tells investigators she was hired by the girlfriend of Brian Gustav. Shortly after Gabriel's arrest, Gustav and his girlfriend arrived from the Virgin Islands. They've been running the Augusta Island Boys.
Three names.
The girl also gives them the names of other women who have worked as couriers. It takes more than a year to gather all the evidence against the new local leaders, but investigators have enough to arrest Gustav and his girlfriend. Brian Gustav is convicted of drug trafficking. His girlfriend takes a plea deal. Agents have taken out the leadership of the Island Boys in Augusta once again.
When you do take them down and the next week the same group is up and operating again, it gets a little frustrating, but that's why we work to go up and get to the head of the organization, because that's eventually the only way you're going to be able to stop them.
Arresting drug dealers in Augusta is not stopping the flow of drugs into the U.S. Agents know they must find out who is running the Island Boys operation. Their leader must be in the Virgin Islands.
In 1996, the U.S. Virgin Islands became designated a HIDA, which stands for High Intensity Drug Trafficking Area.
Detective Chris Howell is on the DEA task force formed to target drug traffickers in the U.S. Virgin Islands.
2 minutes out. And up until this time frame, there hadn't been a lot of targeting of these people with established routes and cocaine trafficking. So the traffickers, by this point in the game, had become pretty powerful, and they had a lot at their disposal. So we had a lot of catching up to do.
Agents begin questioning informants and learn that in St. Croix, a prominent local family is involved in the cocaine shipments from Colombia.
Intelligence information that was gained from confidential sources stated that one of the family members was the St. Croix girlfriend of James Springett.
Investigators recognize the name. In 1992, DEA agents photographed Springett after Eugene Smalls picked him up at the Atlanta airport.
And that informant also told us that he was the biggest drug trafficker in the islands. And so our focus kind of started to begin to switch focus from this prominent family over to James Springett.
Investigators discover that Springett's girlfriend has more than half a dozen cell phones in her name. These phones may hold the key to cracking this dangerous drug gang.
When we began to look at those phones and look at the toll information off those phones, other names that came up through informant information began to appear on those tolls. And it was obvious that this girl had, something to do with what was going on.
While agents pursue the cell phone lead, they continue to work the streets. From informants, agents learn that a small shipment of cocaine is scheduled to leave St. Thomas via seaplane. The surveillance team spots a suspected courier carrying a cardboard box aboard. The seaplane takes off for the largest of the U.S. Virgin Islands, St. Croix.
We let them board the plane. We get airborne on their way back to St. Croix. And we established surveillance where they were going to dock here in St. Croix.
When the seaplane lands, Detective Chris Howell and the DEA are waiting. They suspect the box the courier is carrying is full of cocaine. Agents are in place for a routine takedown, but the plan changes. Something has spooked the courier. Agents must move in.
The individual who was carrying the box ran straight to the ocean, jumped off the dock into the ocean. As he tore into the box, kilograms of cocaine began to float out into the water.
The courier is trying to destroy the evidence.
He knew that if he could get those packages open, once that cocaine hit the water, it would just dissolve into nothing. But I wasn't going to take any chance. I wanted to get all 7 kilograms. I didn't want him to tear into anything.
Hey, chill out, chill out.
Detective Howell rescues several kilos of evidence and a cell phone purchased by Springett's girlfriend.
Face down. Can't find you back.
The courier is in serious trouble and he knows it. Still, he refuses to tell authorities who he's working for.
In the islands, it's very rare to see people cooperate. Very rare. When we arrest somebody, even when they're facing serious jail time, they'll just do their time, and that's it.
As a result of the operation, the Island Boys are now on high alert. They know the feds are watching them. They quickly change their tactics.
Springett made an executive decision that they wouldn't bring cocaine directly into the U.S. Virgin Islands.
Instead, the gang will use the island of Tortola to warehouse their drug shipments.
The British Virgin Islands is literally a 5 or 10 minute boat ride away from St. Thomas, so you could be in British waters and a minute later and you're in U.S. waters, or international waters for that matter.
As a British possession, Tortola is outside the jurisdiction of U.S. law enforcement. On June 19, 1996, the Island Boys bring 1.5 tons of cocaine on shore in Tortola.
You're talking about loads that are worth millions and millions of dollars at a time. And very rarely does a group run that much dope without having some firepower behind them.
Heavily armed Colombians are present to verify the delivery.
Those people's job was not only to look after the South American interest, but also to protect the load.
Cocaine is loaded into 2 vehicles, a truck and a van. This shipment is so important that James Springett personally oversees the transfer. The 2 vehicles head for a safe house to store the cocaine. The drug dealers are unaware the Royal Virgin Island police are waiting for them. Officers have been watching the van for over a month. Every 2 weeks, it travels from the east end of the island to the west end, weighted down with something heavy.
They suspected it could be drug trafficking, but they also suspected it might have been involved in some burglaries that had been occurring on the east end of the island.
When a pickup and van approach, the Royal Virgin Island police move in. The pickup manages to squeeze through the roadblock, but the van is stopped in its tracks.
Hands up! Out of the car! Out of the car now! Out of the car! Move! Put your hands up right now!
The suspects open fire with automatic weapons. The police are outgunned.
Most of them had 6-shot revolvers, shotguns with 3 rounds, and weaponry of this nature. And they stood up and returned fire against automatic M16s, firing at full burst.
One officer is hit.
The round passed out the side of his head, and he was lying in a pool of blood on the street. And so they basically, at that point, began to try to keep him alive.
The van gets away. The wounded officer is rushed to a hospital.
Just wondered that just the shock, the impact alone didn't kill him. But it put his eye out, and they got him to the hospital. He lost his eye, but he did live.
The next day, police find the van a mile down the road. The tires, the radiator, and the engine have been shot to pieces. In the back of the van, police find 1,260 kilograms of cocaine. They also find night vision goggles, GPS devices, and lights for signaling aircraft. The Royal Virgin Island police believe the drug runners will try to escape to a nearby island. They contact police commissioners in the U.S. Virgin Islands and the surrounding area asking for help. Authorities know they must locate these dangerous men fast. If they're willing to shoot a cop, no one is safe. In the British Virgin Islands, a firefight erupts between heavily armed drug runners and the Royal Police. The drug runners make a daring escape, but investigators seize a van full of cocaine. The Royal Police warn their counterparts on the surrounding islands to be on the lookout.
It was almost like a Caribbean all-points bulletin.
Detective Chris Howell.
They put it out to all the police officers that this occurred, and to be a lookout on the beaches and so forth, marinas, docks, boat yards and everything, that these individuals may be heading our way.
You seen these guys?
Police around the islands are on the alert for anything unusual. Early the next morning, officers stop a suspicious boat. There are no drugs or weapons aboard, but there is a large amount of cash.
They were questioned and then later released by police, as there wasn't enough evidence at the time to hold them. Those individuals were linked through informant information as being Springett's boat crew.
They were the same boat crew that brought in the cocaine that had been recovered by police in Tortola. A few days later, U.S. Virgin Island police find the body of one of the men from the boat. He's been shot in the head twice, execution style.
To me, all that was an indication that Springett's organization was not going to accept failure. there had to be a cost to losing that load, even if that meant the life of one of his own.
At the roadblock, the gunman may have escaped. But the cocaine they lost was worth millions.
You don't lose 1,260 kilograms of cocaine without someone paying for it. Springett had to go back to South America and explain this to the people he was getting cocaine from. And he didn't want to go back without there being a body attached to the loss.
For Springett, it's a temporary setback.
Kilograms of cocaine were, during this time frame, were almost on every commercial flight heading to the U.S. mainland. They had dirty baggage handlers that would put cocaine in bags, sneak them past customs, put them on the aircraft, and then a mule would actually take custody of that bag when it arrived in a U.S. city and move it on forward.
In Georgia, FBI Special Agent Tim Cox and Customs Agent Larry Sapp are working leads of their own. They've been watching a man named Ronnie Pemberton. They believe he's the latest drug dealer to head the Augusta branch of the Island Boys. 3 months after the Tortola shootout, FBI Special Agent Tim Cox decides to send a message to Pemberton at the Atlanta airport.
I had heard through our street sources that Pemberton had called me a punk and said we were never going to catch him. And so I thought I would at least introduce myself. So I went to the airport when he came back in and went up and introduced myself and said, "Hi, Ronnie, welcome back to the country. I'll be around. Come see me if you'd ever like to talk."
But as agents know, Island Boys never talk. Months pass. In the Virgin Islands in early 1997, the two agents get the break they've been waiting for. A member of the Island Boys sells cocaine out of a hotel room in St. Thomas. A fellow gang member and a buyer sent to kill the dealer pay him a surprise visit. The Island Boy tries to warn his friend by using a special knock signaling danger. The dealer gets the message. He escapes out a back window. The island is a small place to try and hide. Gang members are everywhere. The terrified dealer secretly turns himself in to authorities. In exchange for protection, he agrees to tell the FBI what he knows about the Island Boys and their dealings in Georgia.
Both Larry Sapp and I were very excited because we knew that if we actually had someone that could identify more of these people and put us in touch with the routes they use, the methods they're using to transport this stuff, it could be a huge break in the case.
Former U.S. Customs Agent Larry Sapp.
He was the first one to give us all the ins and outs, who was the leaders, how they smuggled, how they distributed, who were distributors, and things of this nature. It's a real big break in the case.
Agents are finally starting to get inside this dangerous gang. They begin trying to make their case against the suspected leader, James Springett.
We would search customs travel records. We would find out when he had gone in and out of different countries. We would find out when he would show up on either wire intercepts or show up in conversation with someone else. By doing that and by tracking the shipments, you can put Jimmy in the same area. This all goes to circumstantial evidence and ties Jimmy with it.
Springett is careful to keep his hands clean. He does his dirty work through intermediaries and rarely comes in contact with the coke. At the same time, on the island of St. Croix, the DEA convinces a federal judge to allow them to wiretap the prominent family suspected of drug smuggling and of having ties to Springett.
We applied for the first ever Title III in Virgin Islands history.
DEA agents secretly install the wiretap in a switching station and hide the equipment.
We'd already received information that they had individuals that worked within the phone company that were checking their phones regularly to see if they were tapped. And so we had to hide that equipment within the phone company's regular wiring.
For 1 month during the summer of 1997, investigators listen to the wiretap and conduct simultaneous surveillance. They hear frequent references to Springett's girlfriend, but nothing concrete. The Island Boys are careful about what they say on the phone.
You could tell the conversation was starting to get good. And the next thing that we would hear is, "Let me call you back." And then surveillance, watch him hang up the phone, jump in his car, and drive down to a payphone, and he'd finish the call at the payphone. Almost from the onset, they knew we were on that phone. Certainly when you go up on a wire, you expect when the wire goes down, there's going to be a roundup very shortly thereafter. We weren't there with this wire.
The wiretap does provide enough evidence to justify search warrants. On August 7th, agents launched simultaneous raids on 22 island homes and businesses. They have enough to go after several members of the Island Boys gang, but they need a lot more to take down James Springett and dismantle his entire drug trafficking organization. In the Virgin Islands, the DEA and police raid 22 locations. They need enough evidence to put suspected drug lord James Springett out of business forever. His girlfriend's house is a prime target. In her bedroom, agents find $500,000 in cash and a business card for an attorney in Panama. They also find Springett's U.S. passport. The passport is stamped with the dates the drug lord visited other Caribbean islands, as well as Colombia, Venezuela, and Europe. By comparing those dates to intelligence on large drug shipments, agents can show whether Springett was in the same country when the drugs arrived. Virgin Islands Police Detective Chris Howell flies up to Augusta, Georgia to meet with FBI Special Agent Tim Cox and Customs Agent Larry Sapp.
We hooked up with Chris Howell, and it was another one of those breaks in the case. Chris had a wealth of information down there about activities in St. Thomas. We had a wealth of information about activities going on in the States. And when we compared the two, we found out that his departures were our arrivals. We cross-matched some of the trips, who was going, who was coming. It was great information that we were able to collaborate on.
Authorities finally have enough circumstantial evidence to nail James Springett.
Independently, we could have probably put together a case in the islands, and likewise, they probably had the ability to do that there in Georgia. But you combine the two cases together, it seems like it's an unstoppable force.
Chris Howell wants all the cases tried in Georgia. It will be too difficult to convict Springett in the Virgin Islands.
He had evolved into a monster by this point. I mean, he was very well established in South America. He had his own routes here. He had his own assets available to him. So anything you can throw into that on your end is beneficial.
It would help their case if they could find a more specific link between Springett and the cocaine shipments. Agents review the evidence one more time.
When we had done the search warrant at Springett's St. Croix girlfriend's house, we had found business cards for a Panamanian attorney, and we also found business cards in the name of Omega Sea Cargo.
According to customs records, a freighter owned by Omega Sea Cargo was stopped a few months after the Tortola shootout. The ship was searched. 8 tons of Colombian cocaine was found in the cargo. Working on a hunch, agents research Omega Sea Cargo. The company is owned by James Springett.
It was huge. It was a huge chunk of the case right there. I mean, now we had 6,000 kilograms on Mr. Springett. That was a good feeling.
Federal authorities develop a plan to dismantle the Island Boys, starting in Augusta, Georgia. December 15th, 1997. Ronnie Pemberton, the local head of the Augusta gang, attempts to buy 2 kilos of cocaine from a Virgin Islands supplier. The FBI is watching. In the motel room next door, Customs Agent Larry Sapp and FBI Special Agents Tim Cox and Mike Varicalli videotape the buy via hidden camera.
Our ultimate goal was to tie the organization all the way back to a Colombian connection and find out where the drugs were being processed and at what point they were being handed over to Springett and his organization so we could get to the highest level we possibly could.
Ronnie Pemberton came in, met the informant. We got it all on video with him holding up the keys in hand, balancing, weighing to see which one weighed a little more than the other.
Pemberton takes his time examining the bags of cocaine.
Finally, he picked 2 he wanted.
All right, roll over. Sit up.
Special Agent Tim Cox personally arrests Pemberton.
I said, "Hello, Ronnie, remember me from the airport?" And he nodded, and I said, "Well, who's the punk now?"
Shortly after Pemberton's arrest, FBI Special Agent Tim Cox is promoted and transferred.
It's a bittersweet pill because I was with this case since its inception. I knew we were headed towards taking Jimmy Springett off, but I also knew I would not be there for the finish.
Cox leaves Special Agent Mike Varicalli in charge of the Island Boys investigation. Over the next few months, Varicalli and his team continue methodically building a case against Springett and the Island Boys.
The more we looked into it, the more we uncovered. 10,000 kilograms turned into 20,000, which turned into 50,000.
Less than a year after Pemberton's arrest, an Augusta grand jury delivers indictments against Springett, his girlfriend, and 5 of his closest associates.
We had a sealed indictment for quite a long time, and we're just building a case. We were building a story. We were basically building our case for court. We identified individuals, we identified assets.
Investigators want to arrest all suspects simultaneously so that none of them can run. But there's a snag. Springett has gone into hiding.
It was a frustrating time period because here we are ready for this party and we can't find our main guy.
Springett is smart and careful.
He did not use the phone unnecessarily. He did not spend a lot of time in one location, and he tended to reside in areas where the U.S. government didn't have complete access and total reach.
For 2 long months, authorities can't find him. Then, in Medellin, Colombia, the case takes a dramatic turn.
Please have a seat.
A local woman approaches DEA agents.
How can we help you?
She tells them she knows a big American drug dealer. His name is James Springett. In Medellin, Colombia, DEA agents get a big break in the search for drug trafficker James Springett. An informant claims she knows where Springett lives.
She basically walked into the DEA office there and agreed to cooperate with law enforcement.
How can I help you?
Detective Chris Howell.
She indicated he had a penthouse apartment in Medellin. We knew the apartment existed, we just didn't know where it was. The apartment had like muraled ceilings, solid gold faucets, a very expensive apartment.
The woman agrees to give the DEA the location of Springett's apartment. In exchange, she wants a fresh start for her family in the witness protection program.
We've been looking for you.
Authorities agree to the deal. Special Agent Mike Varicalli.
Springett was pretty well insulated in Medellin, Colombia. It seems to be a haven for high-ranking drug organization members, so it's traditionally difficult to locate and apprehend an individual for drugs in Medellin.
The DEA requests an arrest warrant from the FBI and U.S. Customs in Augusta, Georgia. Former U.S. Customs agent Larry Sapp.
The agent there called me and asked me, do we actually in fact have a warrant for James Springett? Of course, I enthusiastically told him yes. He asked for me to fax down the fingerprints, the pictures, and all the stuff he would need to get him picked up.
The DEA also contacts trusted members of the Colombian police. 2 Colombian police officers stake out Springett's luxury apartment, waiting for him to appear. To the Colombians, it looks like Springett is leaving for good. They have to move fast.
They felt like their surveillance was burned, and they better go ahead and arrest him, and that's what they did.
The officers don't have time to wait for backup. They move in.
Those two stopped the vehicle and arrested Springett and his driver by themselves, which we thought was mighty courageous.
Special Agent Tim Cox.
When I first heard that they had him in custody down in Colombia, I was elated. This was the culmination of a 14-year investigation, which started from the lowest level street dealers all the way up to the made man with the Colombian mafia who had the direct Colombian connection supplying cocaine.
Agents from the FBI, Customs, and the DEA converge on the Virgin Islands to arrest Springett's associates. Local drug dealers quickly retreat into their fortified mansions.
We probably got dope dealers flushing their dope everywhere on St. Croix.
One mansion on St. Thomas is so remote and well protected that Virgin Island police have to rappel down the cliff above it and approach it from the rear.
They had walls up around the house, electric gates. There was a real security issue on how we could do these things successfully.
House by house, the task force arrests the leadership of the Island Boys. Although they finally have Springett in custody, getting him back to the U.S. proves to be far more difficult than anyone had ever imagined.
He's in custody in Colombia, yeah, and that's the big problem, because extradition out of Colombia is a difficult task, and what made it more difficult is he had citizenship at that point in Colombia.
Investigators will now have to go through a long bureaucratic process to try to extradite him back to the U.S.
It's like beating a dead horse. I mean, there's nothing you can really do to speed the process. You put in the request and it goes through the channels and then you just wait.
I knew that the longer Jimmy was down there, the longer we didn't have him on American soil in our custody, the greater the chance that he would either escape or someone would break him out.
While in prison, Springett pays to have luxuries brought in to pass the time in comfort.
They have people that wait on kind of like orderlies to go to give them stuff, and if they can't leave the penitentiary, they'll go outside the penitentiary and get it and bring it back to them.
On March 1st, 2000, a few days before his extradition becomes final, Springett orders a new mattress.
When the new mattress was delivered to his cell, he was able to insert himself in the new mattress. It was just wide enough to fit his body, and the individual that brought the mattress to him aided him in sewing the mattress back up. So there was no hole, there was no evidence that someone had been inserted into the mattress.
One of the most dangerous drug dealers in the world is carried out of his cell past unsuspecting guards. American drug trafficker James Springett attempts a daring escape from a prison in Colombia sealed inside a mattress. FBI Special Agent Tim Cox.
Jimmy got into the mattress. They stitched him back up in there and proceeded to carry him through, I think, about 5 checkpoints, getting him out of the prison.
He don't like the money. He wants another one.
An investigation later shows that Springett paid more than $3 million in bribes to set up his incredible escape. Investigators take the news hard.
James Springett has escaped. He's gone, man.
I'd put 10 years of my investigative career into eventually getting this guy, and now he was gone. I was completely deflated. We had a hard enough time catching him the first time. It was my fear that because he'd been caught one time, that we'd never be able to get him again.
Detective Chris Howell.
We're back at ground zero trying to figure out where do we go from here. At that point, we have no idea to even, where to look. We have no leads. We have no idea. He could have been anywhere in the world.
Exactly.
Agents notify FBI legal attachés at U.S. embassies throughout Latin America. They also notify Customs and DEA agents working in those countries. FBI Special Agent Mike Varicalli.
We basically contacted Interpol. We contacted all the countries we know he has ties to and got the word out as far as where he last was, what he looks like.
There was rumors starting to spread that he had had reconstructive surgery, you know, changed his appearance and everything, and it just kind of became like this urban legend, you know, this guy who was out there, but no one knew how to find him.
According to rumors, Springett is living somewhere in Latin America and running his organization by phone.
Jimmy, just like anybody else, has to have an income. When you're spending $5 million on an escape and you're living the lifestyle that he's accustomed to doing, you have to have an income. So he had started generating that income again.
In April 2002, the FBI adds Springett to their list of top 10 fugitives.
And to put him on the FBI top most wanted list during this time frame was major because, I mean, he was sharing poster space with guys like Osama bin Laden at that point.
Investigators also play a few long shots. They set up surveillance on a drug dealer known to be part of Springett's group. Agents wait until they have probable cause and then search him. They find a large amount of cocaine and take him into custody.
Help us find your uncle. You'll do a lot less time.
Investigators pressure the dealer.
What city is he in?
I don't know.
What country is he in?
He decides to talk. He tells them Springett now lives in Venezuela. He doesn't know which city, he only knows the phone number. The FBI legal attaché in Venezuela gives the phone number to an elite team of trusted local police officers. Using the phone number and informants, the Venezuelan police locate Springett's home and stake it out.
Springett offered $2 to $3 million to just let him walk away from the scene.
There are many honest law enforcement officials that there's no amount of money that would entice them to do that. Thankfully, we had some down in Venezuela.
FBI, DEA, and customs agents work to get Springett back to the U.S. as soon as possible.
The Venezuelan authorities declared him persona non grata because he's in the country on a false passport and ordered him to be removed from the country immediately.
Less than 24 hours after the arrest, Venezuelan police hand Springett over to FBI and customs agents at the airport. Agents fly him back to the United States.
He knew that he wouldn't stand a chance going to trial in Augusta, Georgia, with all the evidence that had been, you know, mounted against him. I think he knew the only thing he had available to him and his only chance of ever having, you know, the chance to see the light of day again would be to accept a plea agreement.
Springett pleads guilty to one count of conspiracy to import cocaine. The notorious drug lord is sentenced to 35 years without parole.
Hard to beat the significance of this investigation. When you talk about a street-level case being worked all the way up to a 10 most wanted and an ultimate capture, it's kind of hard to beat that. It's definitely a highlight of my career.
A shooter takes deadly aim at the residents of a small Georgia town. Police and the FBI begin a desperate search to find the killer. They struggle to make sense of the evidence as the body count climbs, all in an attempt to stop this murderer before he puts his next victim in his sights.
In Georgia, a series of bizarre shootings terrorized the small town. 2 people were killed, 2 others were critically wounded. At first, the shootings seemed targeted. Then they seemed random. I'm Jim Kallstrom, former head of the FBI's New York office. As the body count climbed, the killer taunted law enforcement with mysterious notes. Agents believed the shooter would continue to kill until he was dead or behind bars.
East Point, Georgia is just 7 miles south of Atlanta. It's a quiet city with a population of 40,000. East Point averages 6 to 8 homicides a year. March 1st, 2001. A man is concerned about his mother. He arrives at her house to see if she's okay. He normally speaks to his mother by phone every day, but this day she did not answer his calls. Then he sees signs of foul play that lead to his mother's car.
Mom!
He makes a horrific discovery.
Mom!
Minutes later, East Point Police and Lieutenant Russell Popham begin a homicide investigation.
We discovered the victim was a female that had been shot and she was dead of multiple gunshot wounds. We did notice that she had been there for about 24 hours.
Police can already rule out one reason why the victim was murdered.
As always in any kind of crime, you try to figure out the motive, but obviously her car was still there as well as her pocketbook. So we didn't think at the time that robbery was the motive.
Detectives identify the victim as Pamela Clark. They also find a badge.
The victim was a probation officer with the state of Georgia. She worked for the Department of Corrections and she supervised probationers.
Since they have limited investigative resources, East Point Police request the FBI and the Georgia Bureau of Investigation to assist at the crime scene. FBI Special Agent Pete McFarland is on a task force that assists local police departments with forensic analysis.
A lot of the local police departments did not have the equipment such as Lumilights. We actually process vehicles for latent fingerprints. We process items that we pick up for latent fingerprints.
Agent McFarland finds signs Pamela Clark was shot at almost point-blank range.
You could see where the person had shot right through the window and glass had actually impaled the victim's face. So it was very close. I guess you could say it was an execution.
The killer was both brutal and careful. East Point Police Detective Bobby Gray finds no bullet shell casings at the scene, despite multiple shots being fired.
No shell casings could mean that there was a revolver. Until we know differently, we're going to assume either the person picked him up or he was using the revolver.
Police believe the killer premeditated the murder because of the lack of evidence.
There was no fingerprints left at the scene. It was a very sterile scene.
Detectives want to know who would want Pamela Clark dead. For answers, they turn to the victim's son. He spoke to his mother every day. But she seemed happy and never mentioned trouble with anyone, including her probationers. To investigators, it seems that the fatal shooting was a random attack. That night, detectives go door to door throughout the neighborhood. They're searching for anyone who saw anything suspicious in the last 24 hours. They find only one witness.
He was in the shadow, though, and
The previous night, she heard noises that could have been gunshots. Then she saw someone calmly walking away.
What time of night was it? Around 8?
The witness said she saw a black male about 6 foot tall. She's looking at a distance from about 40 yards, so she can only tell that he had a low haircut, and he was about 6 foot tall, of average build. There was not much light. That's all she could come up with.
If you got to tell me anything, or if something pops into your mind, just give us a call.
Unfortunately, the witness is unsure she'd recognize the man if she saw him again.
There are 3 bullet wounds.
The medical examiner confirms several findings investigators made at the crime scene. Pamela Clark was murdered 24 hours before her body was discovered. The medical examiner identifies 4 bullet wounds, 3 to the left side of the torso and 1 near the right armpit area. The tight grouping of the 3 wounds is consistent with police theories that the killer shot the victim at close range. Police get their first clues about the murder weapon when the medical examiner removes 3 .40 caliber bullets from the body. Although 3 bullets are recovered, the victim had 4 gunshot wounds. Investigators recover the 4th bullet from the passenger seat of the victim's car. It's also .40 caliber. Agents find the vehicle unusually cluttered with junk mail, bills, and other letters. The victim's son said his mother usually sorted her mail in the car after she picked it up from her mailbox. Agents also note a few other items.
I thought she may have had some children in the car because there were some wrappers also in the vehicle.
Based on the evidence recovered from the car, the autopsy, and witness interviews, detectives put together a murder scenario that paints a picture of a ruthless, calculating assailant. Investigators suspect the killer was lying in wait as Pamela Clark arrived home on the evening of February 28, 2001, at about 7:30 p.m. It seems he was familiar with his victim's routine as she arrived home from work. There he'd have a captive target as she sorted her mail. Detectives believe the killer either picked up all the .40 caliber shell casings or had some other way of containing them as he fired. Then he left Pamela Clark to die. Police have a theory on how the victim was murdered, but they have no suspects and a killer on the loose.
We have an extreme whodunit. We have bullets, we have a car, and we have a body, and that's about all we have.
With so little to go on, it will be difficult to find justice for the murdered probation officer. East Point, Georgia police and the FBI have a killer on the loose, a killer who murdered probation officer Pamela Clark. They have no leads and no suspects. They only know the killer approached her while she sat in her car, then shot her 4 times at close range with a .40 caliber handgun. Investigators like East Point Police Lieutenant Russell Popham try to understand why someone would want Pamela Clark dead.
There's an old saying that if you can establish the motive, you can solve the crime. We immediately went to work on her immediate family, her contacts, as well as her job as a state probation officer.
The victim's son said she never mentioned having any enemies. Detectives focus on the victim's job as a probation officer, where she worked with dangerous criminals on a daily basis. The probation officer has the power to send a violent criminal back to jail.
Okay, here's our office. All right.
just look around, and if you need me.
Police searched the victim's office to examine her case files.
She had a typical caseload of anywhere from 70 to 100 probationers. So we looked to see if there was anybody on her probation list that maybe she was about to try and revoke the probation. This took about 15 days to go through the list.
Detectives questioned each of Pamela Clark's probationers to find out where they were on the night she was killed.
Yeah. Devereaux, I'd like to talk to you.
About?
You familiar with Miss Clark? She's your probation officer.
Yes.
You know what happened to her?
No.
Most of them are saddened to hear of her murder.
Murdered?
Yes. Where were you the night she was murdered?
And she's like a mom to me and everything. I mean.
What we found in interviewing her probationers is that she was a well-liked person, a very fair person, almost a mother figure. We heard that from several people that had committed some violent crimes, and they actually liked her as a probation officer.
Don't go out of town.
I'm not leaving town.
Well, I'm going to be back and talk with you some more, okay?
All right, no problem.
But as police scour hundreds of case files, they discover a probationer who had both a motive to kill Officer Clark and the opportunity to study her habits.
We were able to find one person that she was potentially going to revoke her or ask for his probation to be revoked because he had failed a drug test. And this person actually lived in her neighborhood.
The probationer's name is Thomas Moulton. Detectives put a mugshot of Moulton into a photo lineup. They show it to the witness who saw a man walking away from the crime scene on the night of the murder. The witness identifies Thomas Moulton as the man she saw. With the positive ID, it seems investigators may have an open and shut case. March 15th, 2001. 2 weeks after Pamela Clark was gunned down. Police have an arrest and search warrant for Moulton.
Your hands. What's wrong? What did I do? What's wrong?
Tell me what's going on, man.
You're under arrest for parole violation.
During their search of Moulton's house, investigators uncover a jacket like the one the witness saw on the night of the murder.
This looks like the jacket.
Yeah, it sure does, doesn't it? That's it.
Police also make a disturbing find.
He had a box of 9mm bullets in his room, and we knew, however, that the bullets used were .40 caliber, but again, this showed that this probationer had bullets when he shouldn't have. We were alarmed at this.
All right, let's see what we have. Would you look at that?
We still had a lot of work to do to prove or disprove that this person did it.
Thomas Moulton submits to a polygraph test and agrees to be questioned without a lawyer present.
Did you kill Pamela Clark?
No.
Under questioning, Moulton denies any involvement in Pamela Clark's murder.
No.
He claims to have respected her, even though her probation report would send him back to prison.
Did you have anything to do with Officer Clark's murder?
No. I wouldn't hurt her. I liked her. She was good to me.
He explains that the bullets found in his apartment were for a Smith & Wesson 9mm pistol. The weapon was stolen 6 months earlier.
Did you ever use the path in Officer Clark's backyard?
Yes, but everybody used that pad.
When investigators press Moulton for an alibi, he claims he can't remember where he was on the night of Pamela Clark's murder.
The night of February 28, 2001?
No.
Have you been truthful in all your responses during this interview?
Yes.
Throughout the interview, the polygraph analyst detects no evidence of deception by Moulton.
This is over, relax.
Did I pass? Can you tell you?
Police later examine Moulton's telephone records. They discover Moulton was on the phone talking to his girlfriend during the time Pamela Clark was murdered. Detectives clear Moulton as a suspect. They've hit a dead end in their investigation. The killer is still on the loose and free to strike again. April 8, 2001, over a month after Pamela Clark was murdered. It's an unusually warm spring evening in East Point.
It was a night in the low 70s at the time, so a lot of people were enjoying the first few days of spring with their doors open, their windows open.
A few miles from Pamela Clark's home, a retiree named Chuck Boiler hears someone approach.
Who's out there? Who's out there? Who's out there? Hey!
The bullet shatters the man's arm and rips into his chest. He tries to fight back, but he's rapidly losing blood. The gunman lingers. Then disappears into the night. East Point Police Lieutenant Russell Popham tries to get a description of the assailant. But it's no use.
He couldn't tell if it was a man or a woman, the race of the person or anything. And we asked him, well, who would have did this to you? Did they ask for anything? Did they try to rob you or anything like that? And he said, no, I just went to the door and I was shot through the door.
Detectives find evidence confirming the victim was shot at almost point-blank range.
We could actually see the gunpowder residue around the screen, so we knew, again, this was up close and personal. And so it appeared that he was targeted.
Police recover a shell casing.
Detective, we got a shell casing over here. Yeah, 40 caliber.
It's .40 caliber. Then detectives find an unusual clue deliberately left behind by the shooter. It's an ominous note that reads, "I was locked up for 6 weeks. Someone must pay." The reverse side of the note is signed in yellow highlighter. The gunman calls himself Jack. As East Point police try to make sense of the note, they have no idea that more violence is being unleashed just a few miles away. Less than an hour after Chuck Boiler was shot, East Point police will have a new murder on their hands.
Hey! Hey! You mind here?
In the spring of 2001, police in East Point, Georgia are investigating the murder of probation officer Pamela Clark. They have no suspects. Over a month later, a gunman shoots Chuck Boiler point blank, shattering his arm. Police find a note left by the shooter in which he calls himself Jack. Less than an hour after Chuck Boiler was shot, a man approaches another house in East Point.
Help! Hey! Hey! Please, open this door! Give me some help!
The man isn't a shooter, he's a victim. East Point Emergency Services race to their second shooting of the night. Police learn the victim's name is Andrew Wilson, a janitor at a local hospital. In a few hours, Wilson will die from gunshot wounds to his back. Police need to know what happened. They find answers down the street. A car idles with no one inside. Police run the registration and learn the vehicle belongs to the victim. Investigators find bullet holes in the vehicle that indicate Wilson was shot in his car as he pulled up to the intersection. The fatal bullet likely passed through the driver's side rear window, through the back of the driver's side seat, and into the victim's back. After Wilson was shot, detectives believe he got out of his car and desperately searched the neighborhood for help.
Hello? I need some help, please!
Police recover 5 shell casings from the scene. They're all .40 caliber. Just like the casing recovered an hour earlier in front of Chuck Boiler's house. But the fact that .40 caliber weapons were used in both crimes does not necessarily link the two shootings.
The primary murder weapon that's used around here is a 9mm, and as the .40 caliber's gotten more popular, we see a lot of .40 caliber crime scenes.
Then police find undeniable evidence the two shootings are related. The city of East Point has a serial shooter on the loose. He calls himself Jack.
I just need to ask you some questions, okay?
East Point police canvass the neighborhood for witnesses.
Okay, yeah,
They find a woman who saw a black male loitering in the area before the shooting.
She saw that this man standing there, and he was pacing back and forth. And she watched him for 10 or 15 minutes, and she said, "This is not right."
The witness phoned police to report the man.
Yes, I was wondering if you could send out a patrol car to 5th and Brown. Yes, well, there's a man out here. I've never seen in my neighborhood. It's pretty scary, and... Okay, thank you.
When she went back to the window, she saw a car approach the intersection. She never saw the man's face, but she got a good look at his vehicle.
She sees a late model American car. She was very adamant in detail about it, and that was one thing that we really believed her on, that she knew what type of car it was.
The witness was unable to see the car's license plate number.
Okay, well, you've done good. If you think of anything else comes to mind, okay, would you please give me a call? Okay.
In a single night, Jack has murdered one man and seriously wounded another. Police now have 2 bodies on their hands, and every reason to expect there will be more. The city of East Point, Georgia, has a serial shooter on the loose. In a single night, the gunman wounded one man and killed another. Investigators found notes left by the shooter at both crime scenes. They were signed in yellow highlighter, Jack. East Point police and Detective Bobby Gray fear the shooter will strike again.
The frustrating thing about this investigation is we didn't know who, we didn't know why, and we didn't know who would be next.
4 days later, on April 12, 2001, a shadowy figure approaches another house in East Point. A woman is unaware she's a target. She doesn't hear the shot. The TV is her only clue something is wrong. Then she spots a bullet hole and calls 911.
Okay, we'll get somebody out there. Thank you.
East Point police respond to the latest shooting. Detectives believe the shooter targeted the woman and hit the TV by mistake. She's lucky to be alive.
Did you hear anything prior to the shot?
I didn't. I was sitting there watching TV, and I remember flipping through the magazine, and that's all I can remember. I'm sure.
If it wasn't for the TV being in front of the window, the person watching the TV would have been dead. The bullet went through the window, went through the screen, went through the back of the TV, and fortunately, it lodged inside the TV.
Investigators uncover a chilling note that supports their theory and threatens many more victims. It reads, "Better count your body bags."
We knew that this person wasn't going to stop. We're going to have more victims. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when and how many.
Police have no doubt as to who did the shooting. The killer, who calls himself Jack. Hours later, crime scene technicians recover a bullet from the woman's TV set. It's .40 caliber, consistent with Jack's MO. East Point detectives need to stop Jack before he makes good on his threat to fill body bags with more victims. They appeal to other police agencies and the FBI for help. FBI Special Agent Pete McFarlane examines the evidence. He recognizes the notes. He found one when he processed the car of murdered probation officer Pamela Clark. At first, he thought the note was just a child's scribbling. But now it ties Pamela Clark's murder to the shooting spree.
This is it. I knew I'd seen it. Gentlemen.
Eureka. That's the word you want to use, eureka. There's a connect here. When you started connecting all of them together, it's very similar, handwriting or block writing, all done with a highlighter. It was almost like this person was trying to say that, well, I'm a serial killer. I'm out there shooting people just for no reason at all.
The similarities between the notes point to a killer that is methodical, calculated, and consistent. Jack wrote each note on a half a sheet of standard white paper. Jack tore each note by hand, resulting in ragged edges. And Jack signed each note with either an orange or a yellow highlighter. Detectives believe one note contains a possible motive.
I was locked up for 6 weeks for nothing. Someone must pay.
So investigators scour records for anyone recently jailed for that period of time named Jack. They find no viable suspects. Jack and his true motive remain a mystery.
We as investigators had 4 crime scenes, and but we had nothing. We had no suspects, we had nobody.
So you have 1, 2.
Police examine the victims' backgrounds, searching for any link between them that could show a pattern in the shootings.
Right here. Well, we have active 95 north, so here's what happens.
We even went as far as to, did individuals, did they have their oil changed at the same place? You know, their automotive work, was it done at the same place? Things like that. I mean, we looked into every possible avenue to connect them, to disprove that it was random.
The only link police find is that all the victims live within the borders of the same city.
Everything was centered in East Point, as opposed to the shooter going to College Park, which is right next door to East Point, or even back to Atlanta, or to Hapeville, or some other jurisdiction in close proximity to East Point. Everything was centered right in East Point.
Detectives know that when the killer strikes again, it will be in East Point. Anyone within city limits could be a target. Police take unprecedented measures to warn the public. They use a computer system to dial every phone number in East Point. Anyone who picks up the phone hears a message warning about a killer on the loose. The taped message tells the public to call police if they see anything even slightly suspicious. It puts the entire city on edge. East Point police work around the clock, canceling leave and beefing up patrols to catch Jack before he strikes again. But they're up against a gunman who kills at a time and place of his choosing.
We felt helpless. We're here to protect the citizens of East Point, and we're here to help. And unfortunately, you don't know when the next shooting is going to happen. You don't know who's going to be the victim. You don't know why they're going to be a victim.
Investigators fear they're playing a grim waiting game with Jack.
I can remember a veteran FBI agent that had worked on some serial murder cases, serial rapist cases, and he said, I'll never forget this, he said, you're probably just going to have to sit back and wait for another one to happen. And that's not really what you want to hear.
"12 days later, on April 24th, 2001, the wait is over. At 1:30 a.m., Rosa Lewis pulls up to her East Point apartment. She's Jack's 5th victim. East Point, Georgia, April 24th, 2001 at 1:30 a.m. Rosa Lewis has been shot in her car as she pulled up to her apartment. She's the latest victim in a series of random shootings that have left 2 people dead. She fights to avoid becoming the 3rd murder victim. Despite 4 bullets that have ripped into the left side of her torso. A roommate calls 911 as Rosa Lewis loses consciousness. East Point Police, the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, and the FBI speed to the scene. East Point Police Lieutenant Russell Popham can't get any answers from the victim. Not now, maybe never.
What we were told was that she was not going to live. We were told that she was that critical, her blood pressure was already dropping, that she wasn't going to live.
Investigators turn to the physical evidence left behind. Once again, they find .40 caliber shell casings, 4 of them. Detectives know the killer, who calls himself Jack, used a .40 caliber weapon in all 4 of his previous shootings. Agents find another clue on the roof of a car that the shooter used to steady his aim.
But you could see the where he actually reached across the roof and was laying across the roof of this vehicle, shooting into the vehicle. You could see the V shape of the muzzle blast on the car itself. The connection is, this is so close. It's so close that this person could not miss. It's not like shooting from 25 feet, 50 yards away. This person got right up into the victim's face and was shooting that person.
Police search for Jack's signature clue.
We immediately began to look for a note. We had the .40 caliber casing, so we immediately began to look for a note. We could not find a note in the darkness. We could find a note, and it wasn't a windy night, so we didn't think the note had blown away, but we couldn't find it.
Although no note is recovered, police find similarities between the Rosa Lewis shooting and the murder of probation officer Pamela Clark. Both women were gunned down in their cars, with multiple shots fired through the driver's side window at close range. Then detectives uncover a shocking clue that changes the entire investigation. Rosa Lewis was a probation officer just like Pamela Clark.
They knew each other. They worked in the same office together. This is too coincidental.
Detectives no longer believe the shootings are random. Somehow the Rosa Lewis and Pamela Clark shootings are related. Police interview Rosa Lewis's roommate and learn Rosa moved into the apartment 2 months ago after a recent divorce.
But she described the relationship to us as an amicable divorce. She even said that the victim's ex-husband had actually helped her move in. There was no reason to believe that he had a motivation to want to kill her.
Agents and detectives go door to door, searching for any witnesses to the shooting.
And we did find one lady who actually lives on a street behind the apartment complex who said she heard the shot. She looked out her window and she saw a car leaving that area. And she described it as a blue car, and she gave us that it was similar to a particular make of a car. So we had now a car, the kind of car we're possibly looking for, the make and model. We just weren't certain what the tag number was on the vehicle.
The witness never saw the killer's face. Once again, police are left with only a vehicle description. Later that morning, police notify Rosa Lewis's family about the shooting, including her ex-husband, William Lewis.
We knock on the door and nobody answers. We knock a few more times and we're about to leave, and as we turn around to walk to our car, a car pulls in. The first thing that we notice is that this car that pulled in was very similar, if not the same kind of car that was described leaving the shooting.
The man driving the car is William Lewis. Detectives break the tragic news to him.
She's Butchick's wife. She's been shot multiple times.
When we told him that his ex-wife had been shot multiple times and may die, he wasn't shocked. He didn't ask, how is she doing? He didn't say, I have to get to her. He didn't say, what are you doing to get this person? It's almost as if we had notified him that something that was not really that significant.
Mind if you check your car?
Detectives ask to search Lewis's car. He consents and says the vehicle is a rental. Hours after the shooting, police could expect to find a weapon, bullets, or a note signed in yellow highlighter if William Lewis is Jack. But they find nothing.
It's clean.
Investigators then ask Lewis for consent to search his house. He agrees. The living room is clean, but it's only one of many rooms.
Mr. Lewis, is that your bedroom back there?
Yeah.
Mind if I take a look?
In the bedroom, police find items that would be common in any home office. But in this case, they have a chilling significance.
As I was standing in the bedroom, I looked over at his dresser, and on his dresser were several highlight markers. It was the same colors of the notes that we had had before.
Mr. Lewis, would you mind coming with us back downtown for a little while? Would you? I mean, just need to go in and ask a few more questions. Is that okay?
Downtown?
Yeah.
The discovery prompts detectives to ask Lewis to come downtown for questioning. He agrees.
I think he wanted to be as cooperative as he could. He wanted to convince us that he was not the person.
Police have no way of knowing if they just put Jack in their car or if it's another dead end. Probation officer Rosa Lewis lies in a coma after being shot 4 times in the chest. Police believe she's the 5th victim of a serial shooter who calls himself Jack. Detectives find circumstantial evidence that points to the victim's ex-husband, William Lewis. But they still have no idea why he went by the name Jack or what prompted his shooting spree. While Lewis is transported to the police station for questioning, other investigators are dispatched to the probation office where his ex-wife, Rosa Lewis, worked. They search her desk for clues. It's the same office in which the first victim of the shooting spree, Pamela Clark, worked. The women were close friends. Investigators find evidence that Rosa Lewis feared for her life. Weeks before she was shot, she wrote a letter and placed it in her desk. It said if anything happened to her, it was her ex-husband who was responsible. From the letter, East Point Police Detective Bobby Gray learns William Lewis made threats to stop Rosa from divorcing him.
He would tell her things like, I know people. I know people who can do things to you. I know how to get rid of you. And he would say things like, I will blow your head off.
In her letter, Rosa Lewis also implicates her ex-husband in the murder of Pamela Clark. Pamela helped Rosa through the divorce and recommended a divorce lawyer. It made William Lewis furious.
And in his mind, if she had not talked his wife into leaving him, his wife would still be with him. He was so mad at her that that was going to be the first person that he would lash out at.
Pamela was murdered the night before Rosa left her husband for good. During questioning, detectives confront William Lewis with the note found in Rosa's desk.
My ex-husband has been acting extremely irrational. Many people have cautioned me to be careful.
And we actually read the letter to him in the interview and asked him about these threats that he was making. And he told us that those are just empty. So those are empty threats. Those are empty threats. There's nothing to that. They're empty.
That's all empty threats. That's it.
Threats.
Yeah.
Empty threat. Empty enough for her to write a letter to an attorney.
It's just words. That's all it was, man.
You ever grabbed your wife?
No.
You ever hit her?
No.
You ever beat on her?
No.
They ask William Lewis more about his relationship with his wife. They learn the couple's wedding anniversary is April 8th, the same day Chuck Boiler was shot and Andrew Wilson was murdered.
What we've theorized is he had probably sitting at home all day on Sunday. It was his wedding anniversary. He wanted his wife, and we think he became angry and just went out and shot 2 random victims.
Can you explain these to us?
Detectives review Lewis's credit card records and learn he rented a car on April 8th.
No big deal.
On the same day that the murder took place, the same car that was seen at the murder scene. Tell me about that.
That's a coincidence.
The car matches the description of the vehicle a witness saw leaving the Andrew Wilson murder scene.
According to him, he liked to rent a lot of cars. We link him to 2 cars that he rented, and the 2 cars that he rented were both seen leaving shootings. And that was very important.
She didn't see me.
During the grueling 3-hour interrogation, Lewis remains deceptive and evasive in his answers. He makes up stories about probationers who wanted to kill his ex-wife. Investigators see through the smokescreen.
This goes to show you have the right to remain silent and not make any statement at all.
It was about 5 o'clock that day that we placed him under arrest for shooting his wife.
I love my wife, okay?
But Rosa Lewis was only one of 5 people targeted by the shooter known as Jack. If William Lewis is Jack, police still have to prove it.
We had to connect him back to these other incidents. We had a lot of circumstantial evidence, but we didn't feel at that time we had nowhere near enough to convict him.
The good news is we have one survivor. She's recovering.
FBI Special Agent Pete McFarland believes one way to link Lewis to the other shootings is through shell casings and bullets.
No shell casing here. That was the first. Victim 2, 1 we found.
The lab said all the bullets from the previous crime scenes came from the same weapon. The bullets that shot Miss Lewis came from the same weapon.
Would match. It does match. So obviously.
East Point Police Lieutenant Russell Popham knows locating the murder weapon will prove their case.
We're lucky we have one survivor.
To this day, we have never found the firearm. We executed 8 search warrants looking for this firearm, and we have never found the firearm.
It keeps coming up. There's got to be something. The highlighters.
Police seized the highlighters found in William Lewis's bedroom.
He wrote these. He left these on every crime scene. He's trying to tell us something. That leads us to the markers he used. What about the highlighters?
They're just your everyday, ordinary highlighter. I found them in Lewis's bedroom. It's just common, so it might not have anything to work with. Right.
But they are a popular brand. Even if the ink matches the notes the shooter left behind, a jury could still have reasonable doubts.
Wait a second. Wait 1 second here. Now look at this book.
The notes themselves might, however, contain forensic evidence.
Every note, it's all the same, all the tears.
Crime scene technicians dust the notes for fingerprints and find only unreadable smudges. They find some of the smudges along the torn edges were not made by fingers, but by human lips.
We believe what happened was that this person had licked the piece of paper and tore it off, moistened the paper, basically, and left his lip prints.
With the paper moistened, it would be easier for the shooter to tear it along the fold. The shooter avoided leaving his fingerprints on the notes, but technicians find traces of saliva that contains DNA. Investigators compared DNA taken from the notes with a sample taken from William Lewis. The DNA matches. William Lewis is Jack.
Even though we didn't have a murder weapon from him, we had his DNA. His saliva is on these notes, and they're at 3 of the scenes.
Serious. Yes, especially look at this. Perfect match.
Excellent.
William Charles Lewis is indicted on 26 counts in connection with the East Point shooting spree. The district attorney plans to seek the death penalty. William Lewis's ex-wife, Rosa, emerges from her coma after months of hospitalization and eventually returns home. In September 2001, 5 months after Rosa Lewis was nearly murdered, police respond to her home once again.
Now you got this today?
Yes, I did.
Miss Lewis called me, said, I just got a letter. It's here, I haven't opened it. I want you to come down here and get it. And I went down there to where she was living and picked up the letter and read it. Basically an apology to his wife.
From the letter, detectives learned the bizarre motives behind the shooting spree.
He knew that if he killed the first victim, which was his wife's friends, it would bring a lot of hurt to his wife. The second victim, the third victim, and the fourth victims were, they were just to throw the police off.
The letter closes all 5 cases and seals William Lewis's fate.
Not only did we have his DNA at the scene, which was enough to convict him, but now we had a confession as to why he did it, and the reason and why he did it.
With his confession written, William Lewis pleads guilty to all counts. He's sentenced to life in prison plus 191 years with no possibility of parole.
We all discussed that at one time. If he had not been caught, would he have gone on and continued shooting people just to lead us away from the whole purpose is to kill his wife? You know, throw us off track. I suspect he probably would have gone on if he didn't get caught.
Only William Lewis knows how many more random victims he would have killed to cover his tracks. The combined efforts of the East Point Police, the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, and the FBI made sure he'd never get the chance to kill again.